I'm saving college football. Commissioner
Holy!
Shanahan been elected to save the sport that we love so much. Here's my
Before
plan.
we get into this, how long did you work on this?
An hour for sure. And the very next slide is where the bulk of the work comes into play. But I mean, this is my crown jewel. So first up, I'm restructuring all the conferences. I don't know how we got in a place where we have Maryland and Oregon in the same conference, but I'm fixing it. I brought back the Big East, and I kind of had to divvy up those schools from the ACC. So the Big East gets back Maryland and Rutgers because them in the Big Ten never made any sense to me. So they're back in the Big East. They also get more so the football brands: Louisville, Florida State, Miami. The ACC gets more of the basketball brands. They get Duke, North Carolina. They also get Kentucky. I don't think the SEC will miss them too much. The Pac-12 looks about right for this season, except they swap out BYU for Colorado. I also know that Utah fans will hate that, and Utah fans kind of stink, so I'm not too upset about hurting their feelings. The Big Ten's probably the big winner here. So they lose Maryland, Rutgers, and Nebraska, and they gain Michigan. Admittedly, I think once this was all done, I wish I would have put Notre Dame in the Big East or the ACC to give them some more football branding, but I had already made the tier maker graphics, so it is what it is. And the Big 12 is almost what it was before Nebraska and Colorado left. So they get Missouri back, they get Nebraska back, they get Colorado back. They keep TCU. I think they're a good fit in the Big 12. And the SEC keeps Texas A&M. I don't think you could really swap those out for any good reason. So the SEC keeps Texas A&M. They lose Kentucky. Other than that, they're the same. So I don't think that they're hurting too bad. I don't think they're crying over Kentucky. Is there any bit from what you see here that you would change as far as conference realignment goes?
No, I love this, and what this overall tells me about you is you are like me in the fact that you're hurt about the original Big 12 breaking up when it did, all because of that stupid fucking Longhorn Network.
Longhorn Network was it ruined college football for sure.
And I was listening to one of the Barstool college football podcasts talk about it. This was honestly the Longhorn Network set all of these like changes in motion where they didn't want to do like a Big 12 network, so they were like, screw you guys, we're gonna do our own thing. And they thought it was gonna be huge. People were gonna watch it, they were gonna make so much money. And then towards the end of it, they're just now showing Bevo like as a live feed, and it's doing horribly.
So I saw that same clip that you did, and admittedly, I didn't know that they had Bevo live cams. That I would have tuned in more often if I had a Bevo live cam.
Probably the most interesting thing on that network, honestly.
That and them losing to Kansas in football. Those are the only those are the only two scenarios where I'd watch that network. And it's the same thing as like the Pac-12 network and why that didn't go great because it's not even like a standard cable channel. Like the Big Ten network, the reason why I think it was so successful and the Big Ten's thriving in the way that it is that it's just a standard channel. So
Yeah,
you get all that extra exposure, even for the lower games that don't make the cut for Fox or ESPN. You still get all these guys on TV that elevate the whole brand. I think that's huge for success of like Illinois and Minnesota is that they're on TV every week, where you can't even say that about the Big 12 or the Pac-12.
and I would even say the Pac-12 was a little more successful than the Longhorn Network, whereas the Pac-12, like the Longhorn, you could add it on to your cable subscription or whatever, but you still got a whole conference worth of stuff. Like even Texas fans have to get sick of just watching, you know, I don't want to say the dumber sports or the less interesting ones, but even like Pac-12 After Dark, I would have no problem flipping on Oregon State, Washington, watching that at 9 p.m. Central Time, where I don't want to watch, canoeing on the Longhorn Network. So
Yeah, the Pac-12 almost had it right. They almost they got the content right. It's just the distribution that
yeah, they did mess up
we're
on
so
that.
close, and now they're dead.
I also like how you just said, let's just go back to the way it was in 1999. Whatever.
Pretty
team
much.
where they
Yeah.
were.
Yeah, pretty much. The Big East, I think in this form is way better than it was. The ACC, I don't think is too terrible. That the big losers are the ACC and the Big East, because neither of those are very good conferences. But I mean, I did my best.
No, they're not very good conferences for football, but man, that would be electric. Those conferences for basketball. Holy crap.
Yeah.
You put Syracuse, Kentucky, Duke, North Carolina, those brands all in the same conference, you would get a lot of viewers for that.
And I think that's the selling point is like, yeah, you do, because I think you got to keep Florida State and Miami together. And if you can throw in Central Florida in the same conference, I think that adds a good mix to it. And if they're not in if they're in the ACC, then it's way more lopsided than it is. So I do think that's the selling point. It's like, well, you are going to collect some stuff on the back end when it comes to winter time. Albeit all three of those brands in North Carolina, Duke, and Kentucky seemingly falling down the poop chute.
It
But
just makes me so
I
happy
think if you do it right now, you can still get it in.
to see. It just makes me so happy to see all these Big 12 teams together again.
I miss the old Big 12 so much.
Put it in the fucking Louvre. Just hang it up. Oh,
Hang it
man.
in.
I mean, it's just so much fun. And like I said, you do miss out on some of these bigger matchups with like Nebraska and Ohio State and Michigan and blah, blah, blah. But you also get matchups with Oklahoma State and Kansas State, and go down to Lubbock for an 11 a.m. kickoff. Go to Ames. I mean, it's the Big 12 is my favorite football conference. And the fact that Nebraska isn't in it anymore, admittedly, how things have shaped up has worked out pretty well from a fiscal standpoint and a brand recognition standpoint, I think. But man, it's just a football sicko. It's the worst not having Nebraska in that conference anymore.
And if you're a football junkie like I think the three of us are, you all remember where you were for that Thursday night Nebraska Kansas State game where Taylor Martinez just absolutely put his nuts on the entire city of Manhattan, Kansas.
What do you have, like 6 40-yard rushing touchdowns?
Oh my
Dude, it was
goodness.
crazy. I was like, dude, what's it going to be like when he wins his second Heisman? Like, I mean, this one's already locked up. What's it going to be like as a fan?
We had anointed him the second coming of Jesus after that game.
He's still my favorite Nebraska quarterback of all time.
I still see clips of him throwing the ball, and I'm like, wait, who is that?
It's not pretty.
I mean, yeah, that part wasn't pretty. That part was not pretty, but man, could he fly. The big run against Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship came up on my feed lately.
That was crazy.
I mean, he didn't get touched. He ran 700 yards, didn't get touched.
Dude, I think ESPN did like a yards counter on the scramble, and it was like close to 200 on that one play.
Just bonkers. Almost everything else about that game stunk, but in that moment, it was the vibes were high. But so conferences are back to normal, back to how they're supposed to be, back to how everybody is happy. And then the conference schedules, I think, are going to be pretty uniform as well. So 12 games, 9 conference games for each of the conference. Then I also want to schedule one of the non-conference games to be kind of how the NFL does it, where they match up based on where you finish in the standings. So 4th place team in the Big Ten plays the 4th place team in the SEC, or so on and so forth. I'd also like to do that for the group of 5 because I think it's important to keep them relevant and to keep that gap between the Power 5 and the group of 5 teams close. I don't know if the numbers are going to let that work. I'll let my deputy commissioner kind of work that part out. But ideally, kind of the same thing. The top team in the Conference USA standings plays the top team in the Pac-12. They get more recognition and an opportunity to kind of show how the two conferences compare and so on and so forth. It keeps those games and those teams more relevant than I think they will going forward. And then, of course, you get the game to do kind of whatever you want. It can be a rival game. It can be a FCS team where you pay them $1 million, so on and so forth. But the schedule's got to be somewhat uniform. Not one conference plays this many conference games. This conference plays 8 conference games, so on and so forth. It's got to be on a more level plane.
Even if we didn't, do your whole conference realignment thing, which is still a very good idea. I liked how that looked. But going forward with college football, what if the NCAA came in and said, these are the guidelines you have to follow for scheduling? And like you said, so just so we avoid Michigan, their 3 non-conference games are like Iowa School of the Blind, Hawaii, and a Division III school. Where it's like, if you think you're good, like you have to go and prove it against another Power 5. You can schedule a group of 5, and if you want to still help out a school who needs funding and do one of those pay to get your ass whooped kind of deals, you can still do that. But I really like the uniform schedule pitch.
Yeah, there needs to be some sort of like set in stone guideline that every team needs to follow, just to make sure that it's all the same for everybody.
It's just crazy seeing the college football slate in November, or it might even be December, and seeing like Nebraska, Wisconsin, and USC and Oregon, and TCU and Oklahoma State, and then Alabama and Georgia A&M. Like the way that they can manipulate their schedules, especially Alabama, because they always have a bye before the LSU game. They always have this cupcake before the rivalry game with Auburn. It's just so set up for them to cruise, and it's so silly to me.
It is dumb, and they're not breaking any rules by doing it, but it just really is annoying how they do it and when they do it. Because like you said, they do it to make sure it's like a tune-up game, make sure everybody gets healthy. You're not playing back-to-back super tough games, where in the Big Ten, like Nebraska's had some years where you're going Wisconsin, Ohio State, Iowa, and the fact that Alabama can tiptoe around 2 or 3 tough games in a row just to keep people healthy or their record in line is really annoying to me.
Well, if you want to get real chaotic with it, you bring in a wheel. You put all the active players on every roster for each team, and you spin it. And the 2 players that are picked are out the next game. And you just do it one time every season. See how good these teams actually are. Because hey, sometimes maybe your starting quarterback goes down, or maybe it's your long snapper, or maybe it's a star DB. I don't know. I think you want to get real wild with it.
As definitely the wildest idea I've heard. So as far as the playoff goes, I want to keep that pretty similar to how it's going to be when they expand it to 12 teams. Only difference in the qualification is 7 best conference champions instead of 6, because now there's a 6 power conference in theory. And it still opens up the spot for the next other team, whether that's the Conference USA champion or the AAC champion or however that shapes out. I like the fact that we can incentivize conference championships again. Because, gosh, this last slate of conference championship games were just so meaningless. Georgia could have lost and still made the playoff. Michigan could have lost and still made the playoff. TCU did lose and still made the playoffs. None of it mattered, and it stunk because those are supposed to be the conference's best playing each other. And I get that divisions kind of watered that down a bit, but nonetheless, it just felt like such a empty experience. And I think that's really important. And then the other change that I want to make is I want the number 1 seed to get a conference game or to get a playoff game on campus. I want to create even more incentive to be the number 1 team. So in a situation like Michigan and Georgia this year, you know that they're going to be 1 and 2 in the final rankings. But if Michigan had, beaten Purdue like they did, and Georgia struggled and showed some flaws against LSU, maybe they flip-flop, and now Georgia has to, play on a neutral site in their first game. And I think that's also important because I want to save the Rose Bowl for the national championship game. I'm fine with rotating the other New Year's 5 bowls, the Fiesta Bowl, Orange Bowl, Cotton Bowl, Peach Bowl, and Sugar Bowl for the playoff games. I think that makes it really exciting. Those create really good games for those bowl games. And since this playoffs players aren't opting out as much, ideally, but with so much of college football tearing down tradition lately, we're already losing the tradition of the Pac-12 and the Big Ten champion playing at the Rose Bowl every year. This gives the granddaddy of them all, to put it lightly, an opportunity to still be a pinnacle part of the college football playoff instead of just getting passed around like a bag of chips, like it's probably going to end up being when it's just in the rotation with all the other bowl games for playoffs, and then they go to some random city every year for the national championship game. So that's really important to me, is keeping the Rose Bowl and building a whole new tradition on top of one of the more prestigious venues in the game.
Yeah, I'm not mad at that.
I totally agree with it. Makes sense to me. The Rose Bowl is my favorite just because of the parade of roses and like all the stuff that leads up to it. And so many people tune into the Rose Bowl just because of the name. So if you made that the national championship, I feel like that would add even more hype to it. But as you see, it is a money grab, and some of those other cities would not be happy. And I wish that was the way it was, but
For sure. And I'd also like to preface, nobody's ever going to elect me commissioner of college football. This is not the most profitable of situations.
it
There's
makes
a way to make more money, and that's what decision makers are going to default to.
You have my vote.
you have
Thanks,
mine.
Tyler.
It makes a whole lot more sense than what we're seeing, and with people jumping from conference to conference now, I don't think anything's truly ever off the table. It's just kind of hold on to your pants and see what happens.